So the topic is the new RPA. So it will be released probably the second week of December. So, and most of you probably won't do a transaction between the middle of December and the end of the year. So pretty much.
Well, you're so pessimistic.
I know. If you want a really quiet place to hang out in late December, come into the office. There are actually monks meditating. It's so quiet. But anyway, so the new RPA. One thing that's really nice about this is one, there's a lot of changes, but after reading through it, you'll find that the changes really are, a lot of them do make sense. And being someone who resolves real estate disputes for a living and kind of gets involved in transactions when they're not going well, a lot of it has to do with misinterpreting the old RPA, and they've actually closed some of those gaps. So that would be a good thing. So like I've said many, many times, please read the entire new contract. There is this class or any class is not going to be a substitute for actually reading the whole thing for yourself, word for word, line by line. I'm a pretty slow reader and I do the whole thing in about 30 minutes. And it really wasn't all that confusing. I think you'll understand most all of it if you read it. So I highly, highly recommend doing that. Also, we're going to post some links and I'll email those out. Also, Car Legal has a 5 or 6, maybe even 7 parts seminar. They're 1 hour each from Neil Kalin, the general counsel of Car, on each and every paragraph of this. So today will be a good overview. And we'll get a lot of it, but this will not be completely comprehensive. It's not going to be absolutely everything you need to know. You still need to read it. And then please watch those videos. They do them like kind of page by page or section by section. So we're going to go without 2 hours today. Can't handle 2 hours. Just leave quietly. And I'm going to try to go 2 hours with straight through. So people look like they need a break, they might break briefly after about an hour, but otherwise, I'm going to try to go all the way. So feel free to ask questions anytime. Try to make your questions on point with the topic we're talking about. So don't make me go way ahead with your question. If you have a burning question right now, let's see if we get to that and address it when we get to that section. And if not, once we're there, please ask that question. So the RPA references 63 other ancillary forms. So when you go through this and it says, here's form, it references some other form. It does that 63 different forms. So you guessed it, CAR is going to update all 63 of those forms. So when I started preparing for this, originally what I was going to do is when the contract gets to a form, for instructional purposes, then put that form up on the screen and say this is the form it's referencing and this is what it does. It would take all week if we did it that way. So we're not going to even go over any of the other forms. Some of the new forms are just going to be updated to a new date. They're just going to say 12/21 on the version. But others have been substantively changed to reflect new language in the actual RPA. So the RPA deals with, for example, repair requests slightly differently. The new RR form is going to have a whole other section for lender required repairs. So if you've got a VA or FHA borrower, the seller still doesn't have to do any repair, as we know, but you could at least specify in a separate section now on the RR that, hey, this is a repair that the lender is specifically asking for. This is going to be related to our loan contingency. Wink, wink, please consider doing this repair. Otherwise, we might be, out. So they're going to change that form in that way, change a lot of other forms. in a lot of, similar ways. So if you take a look at the new agreement, the main change, they've done a lot of substantive change, but the main change is the format. So introduction to what we call the grid. So starting in paragraph 3, this is what they call the grid. So I can only take partial blame for this happening. I asked the CAR Forms Committee to consider grouping the relevant contingencies all together on the front page. I said, when I have agents comparing multiple offers, they've got to thumb through all the way to paragraph 14 to find about the inspection contingency, and then go back a few pages to find out about the loan contingency. And all these are relevant terms to know how these offers compare. I said, it'd be great if on the front page, I can see the price, the close of escrow, the loan type, the inspection appraisal, and loan contingencies, how long they last, right on the front page. I could really compare offers better that way, and things won't get lost, things won't get snuck in. So they not only did that, they took it to the extreme. They decided to put everything up front. So when you're filling this out, and this is keep in mind, this is a double-edged sword. It's nice that you're only filling out things in the grid, and for the remaining 13 pages, you don't have anything to add in. That's good and bad. It's good in that it's going to be a lot easier to put together an offer. You're not going all the way to page 8 or page 9 to put in a specific term. But it's bad because you're going to, if you're not careful, get in the habit of just filling out the grid and not remembering what paragraph explains what you're actually doing. So that's why there's no substitute for reading this. And the grid, if you notice in paragraph, in section 3, it tells you the corresponding paragraph that is going to explain the term that you've put in. So, for example, in 3A, when you put in purchase price, you'd think there wouldn't be a whole lot to explain, but paragraph 5 talks about price and talks about deposits. And so what you can do is cross-reference. They have told me that these are going to be live links. So if you hover over the 5 with your mouse, when you've got this up in zip forms, it's supposed to have a little pop-up box and show you paragraph 5. So that's, if they get that functionality right out of the gate, then that's going to be really handy. So you're not flipping back and forth. But keep in mind, the stuff in this grid is not a summary. It's not a summary of the rest of the stuff. The stuff in the grid, these are contractual terms. It's not just a summary of something else that's somewhere else in the contract. So also, we'll show you a lot of the default positions have changed. What do I mean by default position? In a contract where it says buyer shall have 17 days or, and then you could change the 17 days to any other number of days. The default position is 17 days. That's the pre-printed stuff. You can always change it. But the default positions now have changed in a lot of ways where, for example, just to take a kind of a random thing like TV mounting brackets. So I know it's obscure, but TV mounting brackets in the old RPA, it would indicate that they would stay. The seller could take the TV, but they leave the bracket. Or if you contract for something else, they can take it with them. The default position is the bracket stays in the old RPA. In the new RPA, they flipped it. They realized that kind of didn't make sense. Who's going to take down the TV and leave the mounting bracket? And the buyer doesn't generally want it anyway. So they changed the default position to be the bracket goes and the seller will patch but not change. And that's the condition it will be left in unless you flip it back the other way. So the default position in several categories has changed. So what you thought you knew about property condition or any other thing, you've got to read the new contract to see it might be exactly opposite of what you expected. So they didn't do that just to confuse us. They did it based on feedback of, agents and lenders and other people weighing in on, I change this every time because it doesn't make sense. Why don't we make the default position the other way? So they made it together. Let's see. Another example is with tenant occupied property. The default position in the old RPA was that the property will be delivered vacant. The seller will get the tenant out unless you contract it for something else. So the contract, if you didn't change it, tenant occupied property says, seller, you're going to deliver us this property empty and you're going to have the tenant out. As you may have heard, last year it was kind of hard to get tenants out, and they had a whole lot of extra rights, and that caused people to think, why don't we, since failing to deliver the property empty would have been in the old contract a breach of contract by the seller, even though the seller made a good faith effort to get the tenant out, put them on notice, gave them the ample amount of notice, and they just flat out didn't go. But instead of making that a seller breach, a major breach of the contract, let's change the default position to the tenant remains. And then if you want a contract that the tenant will be removed, then you need to manually change it. So the default position on tenant occupied property has flipped. So lots of places in the contract has done that. So if you've always explained it to a seller, if you don't deliver this property with the tenant out, you could breach a contract, and so maybe we need to contract around this. It's exactly opposite of what it was.
Does it mean then that the buyers inherit tenants?
Yes,
Well,
unless you read something. Yeah, unless you agree to something else. So you would just have to go in there and discuss with the buyer, hey, do you want these tenants? And if not, then we need to contract that the property will be delivered to us vacant. And then the listing agent is discussing with the seller, hey, can we get these people really out?
like ahead of time.
Or not? Yeah,
Okay.
right. So they've clarified a lot of language in the contract that has been frequently misinterpreted. I have people talk to me all the time and say, hey, my buyer just moved in and the curtains aren't there. They thought they were getting the curtains. And we look back in the contract and see, well, it said window coverings. And now it's debatable, is a curtain a window covering, or did they just mean blinds and shutters? So that seems like a small issue, but it was over and over. It was just ambiguous enough that they decided to specify that curtains are in fact window coverings, and they stay with the property unless you contract for something else. So also by way of overview, if you see capitalized words that seem to be capitalized for no reason, just a word in the middle of the sentence that's capitalized, like day. If it's capitalized inexplicably, it's because it's what they call a defined term, which means there's a definition of day in the definition section of the RPA. Seems like you wouldn't need definition of day, but you do. And the definition of day has been the source of thousands of controversies over the years. So it explains exactly what a day is. And when there's performance, today is day 0, tomorrow is day 1, and a day means a calendar day. And it explains. So just keep in mind when you're reading through this, if you see a term that for some reason is capitalized, it's probably because it is a defined term, and you should read what that's definition is. So, all right, let's start top to bottom and see how much of the highlights we can hit in this agreement. I'll try to focus on the things that have changed but I also want to get on my usual soapboxes about things that you just should know about doing agreements in general. So the first thing in section 1, you'll notice the price is gone. The price has been moved down to the grid. It's the first thing there in the grid. They thought the format was a little weird to go with price and close escrow and then go into agency relationship, which seems like a sidebar, and then go back to deposits and those sorts of things. So they've done a lot more logical grouping of items together, which means price is not right up there at the top. It's top of the grid. So they added under 1B, they added that the address might be different from city jurisdiction. That was obviously based on some kinds of lawsuits about claiming a property was in one city when it was really another or whatever. Also want to direct your attention to 1D, where it says brokers and agents are not parties to this agreement. So that's not new. That's not a new term at all. It said that exact phrase in the last RPA. But I bring it up because a lot of the disputes that I see kind of got bigger than they needed to because we, the agent, started to treat ourselves like we were a part of the transaction. So yes, you have a fiduciary duty to your client, which is the highest duty you could possibly have. You're supposed to treat that client like it's your grandmother. But it's not your sale. If your client with informed consent wants to make a bad decision, it is your job to carry it out. And as long as it's not illegal or unethical, you are not a party to the transaction. If they say sell it for this price, then do it. If they say no, counteroffer them this crazy counteroffer, do it. You carry out your client's instructions to a T. I've heard many conversations, just people walking through the office, and saying something like, and I can tell they're talking to another agent. No, my client won't do that. No, hell no. No. And it's like, I want to go over there and grab the phone from you and go, excuse me, sorry. What she meant was she will talk to her client, doesn't think that the client's going to go for that, but she's going to get with the client and then get back to you and find out if the client wants to do that. I'm very sorry. Who's this? Oh, but it's like, that's an important reminder that it's not your deal. It is not your decision. And I've had lots of agents just unilaterally making decisions for their clients as if it's their house. And you can avoid a lot of trouble by doing that. So anyway, that's not new, but it's just one of my rants. So all right, number 2A, agency disclosure. They added some language in here. It used to be, they changed this a long time ago, but some people still think that we have to exchange all these AG forms. So you, the buyer's agent, are supposed to put an agency disclosure form in front of your buyer. As soon as that relationship begins, the listing agent is supposed to put an agency disclosure form in front of their seller as soon as that relationship begins. When you write an offer, you are attaching the agency disclosure. The reason it's attached is not because that's the proper time to disclose agency relationships. They attach it because that is the absolute last possible time you could theoretically do it, is right then. And so it goes to the seller, but not because the seller needs it. It goes to the seller because they attach it to the RPA automatically because they know it's so important to you to comply with that law. Does that make sense? So the language they put in here reminds clients that they're not required to exchange these forms. They're each required to have them, but there used to be a third agency disclosure form. Not too many years ago, you used to have to make your agency disclosure as a buyer's agent to the seller and say, hey, by the way, here's the agency disclosure form that you've already signed again. And my buyer's already signed one, but here's a third one for me to advise you about the kinds of agency relationships. They're totally redundant, totally silly, but they refined the law, and now they've dialed it in a little bit more in the contract. Yes.
So is the AD still going to be attached to the new offer?
Yes, for those of you online, the question was, is the AD still going to be attached to the offer? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really should.
So then this means that the AD should have a much earlier date than the actual RPA.
You're so wise. You're absolutely right. Always should. And it rarely ever does. So the agency law says that you, the agent, are supposed to present the agency disclosure form to your client as soon as you engage in a more than casual conversation about real estate. So if you're just at a cocktail party and they say, how's the market? You don't need to be like, excuse me, just need to get your quick signature. That would be nuts. But if they say, hey, you know what, could you give me a call tomorrow? Let's talk a little bit more about real estate. I think I might want to put my home on the market. At the time of that next call, now we're having more than a casual conversation about real estate. An agency disclosure form is required. They should sign it. Just email it to them. Hey, in advance of our phone call this afternoon, the law says I'm supposed to give you this form. Here it is. And just send it to them for DocuSign. By the way, your knowledge of the agency disclosure rules actually can distinguish you from another listing agent. I have been on a listing appointment where I brought the agency disclosure form and asked them to sign it, and said, probably the other agents you interviewed didn't ask you to sign this, right? No, they didn't. Well, it says right here it's required by law. And since I follow all the rules and all the laws, so I'm preemptively shooting down these other agents, maybe being sloppy. And it's a differentiator sometimes. I say, you know what, I know all this stuff that I'm supposed to know. And you should, this agency disclosure form just talks about the types of relationships you could have with an agent. And it doesn't bind you anything. It's not a contract between me and you. It's an advisory that every agent who came to your house was supposed to do. But anyway, just a little listing tip.
I like those words, that this is an advisory and not because a lot of times, if you know them well, they're going to think you're trying to trap them legally into,
right.
You're going to be the one representing them.
Right. All right. So let's move on to pick up the pace a little bit. In 2B, this is the same. They haven't changed anything here, really. Same confirmation of agency relationship. If you autofill from the MLS, the listing agent, when you're writing an offer and it doesn't populate, and you put in your info and it doesn't populate all 4 of those license numbers, you just need to look it up. Just go to dre.ca.gov, put in the license number for maybe the agent, and then it'll show you their brokerage license number, and then you put that in there, and then put the legal name of that brokerage on there.
Do you know if there's any talk for Sandicor to update? I didn't know to go to the BRE. That makes sense. The BRE or whatever it is today. But Sandicor, you can click on the ABC Realty. You click on it, and about 50% don't have their license number.
Yeah.
I'm like, why do we have a board that allows that? That makes no sense to me.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. It's sometimes the fastest way is DRE website.
Yeah, I never thought that, because I'm always trying to track down an agent, or you get offers and it's blank, and sometimes it's a great offer and you got one thing outstanding.
Right.
It's that. Anyway,
Yeah, not sure if they're changing that on standard fourth end, but
CRMLS is the same way.
when you write an offer, make sure that you are putting in all both brokerages, both agents, and all 4 license numbers. And by the way, when I receive an offer, and I'm probably a little bit more
Overkill?
you might not, but this might not bother you as much as it bothers me. But when I receive an offer on a listing and it's missing a license number, it signals to me that the buyer's agent is not a pro. That they're not paying attention to detail, that they're willing to create a mandatory counteroffer for me to clear up something as simple as a license number, when otherwise I might have just had their offer accepted as written. Now I have to do a counteroffer to get this thing sorted out. Same thing with, missing initials. Now that everything's DocuSign, it's a lot less common to miss a set of initials. But when we used to put these in front of people face to face, that was one way you could tell the agent you're dealing with. Did they go back when they got this offer, this precious offer signed? Did they go back and see that their client had initialed every page? So make sure you put in all 4 license numbers. If you receive an offer, they're not all in there or they're inaccurate, you need to make a counter offer to clarify that.
Hey, Ty, real quick,
Yes.
we had a question on Zoom.
Okay.
Just to clarify on 1D, I have had to deal with agents / brokers selling their own property. They are parties of their own transaction, correct?
True. That's the rare exception. They would be a party.
Okay.
If they are actually seller. Sure. All right. Let's see. 2B, the very last line on 2B, where, it says buyer's agent or both buyer's agent or, dual agent. Just a quick sidebar about dual agency. It's not all it's cracked up to be, folks. I would highly encourage you to consider very carefully if you even want to take on a fiduciary duty to a buyer on your own listing. It's legal. In some states, it's not legal. In California, it is legal with informed consent. But I'm telling you, as somebody who is the complaint department, you are highly likely to have a dissatisfied seller or buyer or both, or get in a lawsuit or all the above with dual agency. Yes, you could potentially make twice the money, but it is a considerably high level of risk, and it's a whole nother topic, but it sort of invites the question, how could you have a fiduciary duty to a seller, which means you want to get them the best possible price, the fastest amount of time, the best possible terms, and also take on that same duty to the buyer who wants the lowest possible price, the most favorable terms they can get, the most personal property included, the lowest deposit they can, put out there. How could you do it? The way we saw it in practice really is to breach our duty to both people. What we do is we kind of get in the middle and start to act like a mediator and say, hey, seller, buyer, only wants to put $1,000 down for an EMD. He says he's really qualified, but he just doesn't want to tie up that much cash. And, what do you say? And if you were just a listing agent, you'd say, hey, this guy he's got a suspiciously low earnest money deposit. I wonder if maybe he doesn't want to put that much skin in the game. I wonder if this is the kind of buyer that's going to just back out. Anyone will walk away from $1,000 real estate transaction. It's just not a significant amount of money. And hey, as your listing agent, I recommend we counteroffer this up to an amount of money that our buyer won't just be willing to forfeit. And so we don't waste, 17 or 30 days. But if you were the buyer's agent, you might be talking the seller into that $1,000 just to get the deal off and running, which means you've breached your duty. So anyway, dual agency, just a little soapbox. It's not all it's cracked up to be. And also be aware of the clear cooperation policy. If you're double ending a property that never went on the market, you probably violated the clear cooperation policy. It's possible to do that legit, but most likely it was a pocket listing and you really didn't make it available to other people. And I would argue, if you sold it to your buyer when none of the other buyers in town knew it was available, how did your seller get the most amount of money that she could? That's almost impossible. If we were arguing that in court, yeah, we don't know what someone else would pay, but I would suggest that your buyer didn't pay the most of any buyer in town when we didn't actually offer it up to all those people. So you could find yourself in a jam on that. All right, yes.
So if the other agent is Keller Williams Realty, which box do you check here? Do you still check the seller, whichever?
If it's our Keller Williams Realty, it's dual agents.
But if it's another Keller Williams?
Then that's independently owned and operated, that's another brokerage. So I'm already a brokerage.
Check. So if someone else is the other agent in this office, you have to check the dual agency.
It is dual agents, that's right.
Good.
Yeah, not Deloitte, that's a different company. So we share some services and some ownership group, but I'm not the broker of that one. So it is two different brokers.
You know, it would be good to know which market centers are under our umbrella where we can dual.
This one,
I
Just us.
this
I
one.
mean, just normally check it if it's Keller Williams, no matter where it is.
You just gotta be careful if you're writing Keller Williams Realty and it's two Keller Williams Realty, get very specific. North Inlet, La Jolla, whatever the other ones are called.
And having two separate license numbers is supposed to clear up that too, so put them both on it. All right, let's move on. Let's go into the grid. It's like going into the matrix. We're now entering the grid. Not all of us are gonna make it back. But all right, 3A, purchase price. Pretty straightforward. You type in the purchase price and then you check there if it's all cash. So buyer's agent, if they say it's all cash, you need to verify that. If someone is writing an all cash offer and they give you proof of funds for less than that amount, you have a duty to say, where's the rest of this cash coming from? And you might find out it's a loan from someone else. You might find out it's hard money. You might find out it is locked up in an investment account that takes, 30 days to get out. You could find out a lot of useful information and save your buyer some trouble by asking, where's this cash? Show me all this cash. And look at bank statements, not to pry too much into their information. But if the bank statement is in someone else's name only, that's a problem. It might slip past the listing agent, but that's an issue. That person needs to be on the contract. We need to find out who that person is. So verify, all cash. All right, so moving on. So all the relevant terms here, they're grouped in what's supposed to be a pretty logical order. And I'll direct your attention to some things that have changed. If we take a look at initial deposit on 3D1. 3D1 initial deposit. So the way this is supposed to work once this is actually in zip forms is you can put in an actual dollar amount next to the dollar sign, or you can just put in the percentage and it will calculate both. And it can go either way. It's supposed to work where if you put in 3, it will put the numbers, the actual numbers in there. If you put in the actual numbers, it'll calculate the percentage. That's the way they say it's supposed to work, but double check it and make sure that it's correct. So if you notice right under there, percentage number above is for calculation purposes only and is not a contractual term. What does that mean? It means that it won't change if the purchase price changes. Let's say you're writing a $1 million offer with a 1% deposit, $10,000 EMD, and they counter offer you for 1.1 million, and your buyer says, okay, your EMD deposit is still 10,000 flat. It didn't become 11,000. So the fact that it was 1% is coincidental. That's not a contractual term. So it will not change if the price changes based on negotiations. However, the down payment amount, that would change. If you purport to make an offer with a 20% down payment on $1 million, that's $200,000 down payment, and they counter offer you at 1.1, it is assumed that now you're bringing in more than $200,000 to make it 20%. So it would change in that situation. It will not change for EMD, and that's why they added that language in there. Also notice that the deposit is based on 3 or any other number of days you choose. Business days. This is the only place in the contract where days are business days for the deposit. All right, moving on. If you have an increased deposit in 3D2, remember that once that increased deposit is made, you need to do a new liquidated damages clause, bringing that amount in as liquidated damages. There's the new form used to be RID, now the form is DID form. So delivery of increased deposit. And so you would need to do a new form at the time that that increased deposit is actually living. All right, moving on. Notice in 3E3, it has a little bit more specific stuff for occupancy type. So now, if you see, used to say buyer intends, or you check the box, does not intend to occupy this property as a primary residence. Now it's drilled down a little further. It says primary should be, owner occupied, or secondary for investment. Secondary being like vacation home. They're going to occupy it, but not all the time. An investment, maybe a rental property. So just word to the wise, do not participate in loan fraud. If you know your buyer is misrepresenting what they're going to do with the property, that is defrauding the lender. The loans available to investor buyers are different than the loans available to owner occupied buyers. Some loan types are completely off the table, like VA, FHA. Cannot use those for investment properties. If you have, say, a VA buyer who is indicating that this will be the primary residence, and they have told you this is going to be my rental home or this is going to be my Airbnb, you have to say, we need to get you a different loan type. And if they say, no, this is the way I always do it, I get these investment properties at 0% down, you need to withdraw from representation. You need to tell them, look, we're either going to do it legit or I can't be your agent. That's just a non-starter. If you actively participate in defrauding a lender, 99.9% of the time, no one gets caught, no one goes to jail. But I personally know some people who are in jail. And it's real. So watch them.
Unless you look good in orange or yellow.
Oh, wow.
Hey, orange is the dude. All right. So where are we? Moving on. Let's go to the next page. Next page. You're still in the grid. All right. In G1, they've added a section here for closing costs credits from the seller to buyer. We used to type this in. We haven't seen it in a while because it's been a seller's market, but sellers used to pay closing costs for buyers. It was such a weird world. They used to want buyers. Strange. So once we get back to that world, instead of picking the language and writing it in somewhere, now there is a column here for it, and it already says it'll be applied to closing costs. So that will be recurring or non-recurring. You don't have to specify. And so you just leave that language not using. All right, moving on. Take a look at H3. H3, this section is where you indicate that, your proof of funds is attached, your pre-approval letters attached. It gives us different kinds of pre-approval, different kinds of is it a pre-qualification letter? Is it a pre-approval? Is it a fully underwritten pre-approval? So this gives you as a buyer's agent an opportunity to show, hey, look, this is not just a pre-qual. I hate to say this, but I could get a pre-qual letter right now for a buyer who doesn't exist. I could just call and get a pre-qual letter. It means nothing. That pre-qual letter is different than a pre-approval. Pre-approval is different than a fully underwritten pre-approval. Yes.
Speaking of which, are those
Are there written definitions for those that we can find somewhere?
Well, I think if the letter says pre-approved, we could call it a pre-approval. If it says DU or fully underwritten, we could check fully underwritten approval. But I think the acceptable definitions is fully underwritten means you just need this new contract, a new appraisal, and the borrower himself or herself is approved for a loan already. You just need to plug in the property.
Is that true, lenders? I thought
Means an
DU
underwriter.
like worthless.
Means an underwriter fully pre-approved, I'm sure Bob agrees, means an underwriter actually reviewed.
Yeah, has looked at income, credits.
Right, so DU, they haven't done that, right? I thought DU is just a computer program.
Yeah, that's your pre-approval.
Huh?
That's your pre-approval.
Right, but you just made it sound like it's a underwritten. There's no underwriting, even though it's called direct underwriting, right? It's just,
Yeah.
I could type in whatever. I make $1 million. Okay, you're approved for this. No one's verified anything.
Yeah, the way I would interpret this is a fully underwritten pre-approval means that an underwriter has looked
Okay.
at all the supporting documentation. They obviously.
Okay, I just want, yeah, 'cause we get those all the time and they'll say that and they send a letter that says DU and I go,
Yeah,
where's your, who's Mr. DU? Who looked
yeah,
at
yeah,
this?
right.
And then Ty, Nicole had a question. If an item like the license number is missing, would both parties initialing that addition suffice?
If the license number is missing and both parties initial,
Would both parties initialing that addition suffice?
no, I don't like adding on anything and initially next to it. I would prefer just use an agency confirmation form, an AC form to clarify it or a counter offer.
Okay.
Once it's signed, it's not a good idea to add anything to it, even if we initially. But good question. All right. Okay, in K, this is a new section, assignment request. So the old contract said that buyer could assign, seller shouldn't unreasonably withhold the buyer's ability to assign. An assignment, by the way, is giving all of your rights under a contract to another person, either for a fee or for free, basically putting in a whole new buyer. Assignment could also be adding a buyer. If you were going to take title in just your name and the lender says, hey, we need you and your spouse on here, then you, the individual, are assigning your contract rights to you and your spouse as, say, joint tenants or whatever. So that's an assignment. Now it's dealt with as a line item. You have 17 days to do that. Reason being, some late stage assignments have come in and the buyer has said, hey, seller, you can't unreasonably withhold my ability to assign. And the seller's saying, we're on day 29, that's too late for me. And so now they've put a time limit. And
Hi,
yes,
so should we, if we're representing the buyer, shorten that to make it a more attractive offer then?
the question was, should we shorten that time frame if we're representing a buyer? And yes, that's your prerogative to talk to your client about it. And if you have a seller and you don't want them to have that long to possibly assign, you could shorten it. If you want your buyer to have more time, if there's a possibility they could sign, then you might want to lengthen it. So it'd be a good conversation with the buyer. Hey, is there any chance we're going to sign this? Or, are you trying to double escrow this and actually, sign this to someone else, for a profit? In J, final verification, default of 5 days, or you can change it to any number of days you want. Keep in mind, that's not a contingency. We're not in the contingency section at all. That's the final walkthrough is not a contingency. L2, appraisal contingency. They've added that you can change the value for the appraisal contingency to be some other number other than the purchase price. This is a pretty interesting mechanism that you might be able to turn that dial and say, we have an appraisal contingency on this $1 million property at, say, 900,000. We know we're overpaying for it. We know we're overpaying, but we're going to set our appraisal contingency at 900, even though we're buying it for $1 million. That's something you could do. If you don't do anything there, it means it must appraise just like always at the purchase price. Final agreed upon price. Yes.
We're not going to change it, but do you think that's going to trigger to an appraiser? I mean, it sounds like you're welcoming a low appraisal, because the appraisers are gonna get cut just before they go out to the property. So you're telling them, hey, we don't even think it's worth 900 basically. And that seems like an odd thing for them to put in there.
I think it's interesting, and I think time will tell. I don't know. It will see how many people even change that number. And if they change it, why? What was the rationale? And then how does it play out? I think time will tell.
So contractually, does that mean the buyer's got to come in with more money
That's
to
right.
meet that sales price?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that might be, to sweeten the pot, to improve your offer for your buyer. Say, hey, we know there's 30 offers on this property. We know everyone's overpaying, and we're not all cash. We can't just go over the top and remove the appraisal contingency. But what we can do is say, look, we've got 300,000 for a down payment. So we're not worried about coming in with some cash. And it doesn't have to appraise at this crazy overpriced price we're buying it for. It can appraise less and we're still moving forward.
You're already talking about a loan. So how does the lenders feel about that?
I don't know. That was
Right?
You have no feelings.
Lenders by definition do not have feelings. Yeah,
I'm surprised they don't have, since they have that blank, I'm surprised they don't have a blank right after it of verification of the delta. Right? So in your example, there's $100,000 gap. I don't know, it should absolutely say, because that's what I've written in counter offers, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to remove the appraisal,
Show
then
me.
I want to know that you got an extra $100,000.
Yeah, you, the listing agent, are gonna have to see that and say, hey, fonts doesn't matter.
Yeah, you're seeing one thing, but yeah.
That's right. It's also new, and this is one of the few things I don't like. In L2, third column over, it says removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in FVAC. Remember the VA amendatory clause? The VA amendatory clause is ostensibly an appraisal contingency. For all intents and purposes, it says you, seller, cannot make this veteran borrower buy this property if it appraises for less than the amount you guys have agreed to. It's an appraisal contingency. What happens a lot of times is the VA buyer has plenty of money now, wants to remove the appraisal contingency and be competitive. And the VA amendatory clause trumps what is written in the contract. You cannot contract out the appraisal contingency that the VA amendatory clause creates. I disagree with this. I just bought a home myself using a VA loan. I had more, I wasn't 0% down. I had plenty of down payment. I had to overpay for the house and I had to be competitive. And so I removed the appraisal contingency. I said, I feel comfortable with the value. If it appraises low, I feel comfortable bringing in additional down payment to keep my LTV right. And hey, seller, don't be afraid of me because I'm a VA borrower, because I'm not going to make appraisal an issue. I do not have an appraisal contingency. I cannot cite an appraisal contingency. And we actually had this conversation. They were going to pass us up strictly because of the VA amendatory clause. And I said, forget about that. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to raise this as an issue. Well, now I can't say that. It directly conflicts with the contract. The VA borrower will have those cancellation rights no matter what.
But the buyer can elect to still pay the difference.
They can elect to pay the difference, but as he's saying,
Right, they still have the out.
they have the VA escape clause.
They have the out. So the
It's not
seller,
what the contract
But
says.
but the VA is not going to nix the loan because
No, they're allowed to pay
take them
them.
more money. Right.
But it doesn't sound like it's changed any. Something.
Buyers.
you can use that addendum, but the buyer still has cancellation rights after the inventory clause. It's almost.
I don't see where anything's changed here, just, you've just said all that, and that VA, the clause has always been there.
What has changed is the interpretation before, and it's a great question. The interpretation before was if the parties contract away from an appraisal contingency, that even though the VA mandatory clause kind of creates one, the parties have agreed that they will not cite that provision. They've almost waived the rights that they had in that addendum. And they're now making it very clear that you cannot do that, that it's gonna remain.
But even if they waived it, I think a buyer could still come back and say, I have this clause, whether I waived it or not.
If you,
VA,
if you actively waived it and you did it in writing, especially if you did it after the agreement started by like removing the appraisal contingency with a CR, then they could argue that you consciously removed it.
wouldn't that be the same of trying to remove a termite contingency on a VA? It's just not gonna work. If there's
Yeah.
termites.
Yeah, I think that they put this in specifically because there was confusion about whether or not it would exist or not. They're saying it absolutely will exist.
Okay.
All right, so look at L3. Informational access to property. So so this has always been in the RPA. It used to be hidden away in paragraph 14B5. And I used to always change this amount, this number of days from default 17 to 30. This is just access to the property. Because I know as a buyer's agent, buyers want to go in there long after they've removed contingencies. You know, at like day 25, they want to go in there and they want to measure the rooms. They want to bring in a designer or a contractor or a floor installer or whatever. And they want access to the property prior to the close of escrow. So I've always changed that to 30. It's been kind of hidden in 14B5 and you don't even notice it. I'm sure I put it in there. The seller's agent didn't even notice it. But it's now is a little bit more prominent and it makes it very clear that it's not a contingency. Your ability to access the property for any number of days is not a contingency. It doesn't matter what you find when you're there. In other words, it's just access. So if you hadn't changed that in this contract or the old one, the seller could say, hey, it's day 18. I know you'd love to come over and measure the place, but you can't. You do not have access to the property. And I don't have to give you access. It's kind of a punk thing to do, but I can do that. So just keep that in mind. I recommend changing that to 30 days. And if a seller's agent wants to push back, just remind them it's not a contingency. We're not stretching out contingencies. We just want to be able to come over to the property with reasonable notice between day 17 and day 30 to maybe, you know, show the in-laws or show the parents if you get to that, you know. So
So day 30 is just arbitrary, like that's the close of escrow.
yeah, we're the close of escrow.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
sure. All right. So
On the L2 thing, where did that reference to the FBAC, the inventory clause?
in that third column over, all the way to the right. All right, so where are we? Okay, informational access. All right, there's stuff on that.
Different version, just in case anybody else does.
Yeah, sorry, they're updating it every week, so that's a good reminder that once it actually comes out, probably the second week in December, read it again. They have changed it a little bit more. But your version only predates this one by a week, so that's how fast. Once they officially release it, there'll be no grace period. The only one you'll be able to pull down from zip forms will be these. So once you go to write an offer and this one pops up, and then you'll know that's you got it. All right, so L8. Unless you check that box for COP attached, the sale is not contingent upon the sale of the buyer's property. Please do not have a secret contingency for the sale of the buyer's property. I know it's tough out there, guys. I know it's tough out there. They need to sell in order to buy. Create the contingency and do it in right. Yes, your offer is a little weaker, but to try to hurry and sell and try to convince the seller that we don't need that to happen when you really do need that to happen, is having a contingency that you didn't tell the seller about. That's inappropriate. So just create the contingency, make it as strong as you can. Make sure that the buyer's property is already on the market, already in escrow, it's at a good price, and you can let them know, look, it's going to fly off the market just like yours did, and this won't be a problem. And but don't have a secret contingency out there. So section L is all the contingencies grouped together. One thing you might notice is there are more contingencies than you thought there were. The next thing you might notice is the default now is 17 days for everything. So the loan contingency is not 21 days by default anymore, it's 17. Everything is 17. That's cleaner and easier to deal with, but you can still change the loan contingency up or down to whatever you want. Any of these contingencies, you can change any and all of them to a different date. But for just for simplicity and uniformity, everything is 17 days. And it's all grouped together in this category. So if you're comparing offers as a delinquent agent, section L would be a really good one to check out.
Common interest is HOA, right?
Common interest, yes. Yeah, HOA docs, that sort of thing. Also keep in mind that in all these contingents, well, in most of these contingencies, they add the language 4 or 5 days after receipt, whichever is later. See that? So this was always in the contract too, but it wasn't right there in the contingency section. And I would have agents come to me all the time. Hey, we removed all contingencies, and now the seller's telling us about this. What does that mean? And I would say, well, that kind of revives your contingency based on that issue. And your buyer has some cancellation rights. This is new information. So now, if the buyer, if you've got, say, 17 days, or if the seller just gave you the TDS on day 16, you've got till day 21 now. You've got a reasonable amount of time to review that material. The seller may not realize that, but that's clearly what it says here. And good pro tip, as a listing agent, get the buyer's agent all the disclosures as fast as you can to make sure that you don't run over the contracted days based on when you delivered it. So,
Let me ask something. Real
Yes.
quick. Let's say you do get everything to them, just want to confirm. Let's say buyer asks for specific records on an insurance claim or something like that. That doesn't constitute a delivery of an additional disclosure, right?
not necessarily. If you let them look into it, then it's their own discovery and it isn't a seller disclosure at all,
Right.
which would be the preferred method. It's just part of their investigation period. But if the seller has something like information about an insurance claim and doesn't give it to them, and they've got 5 days from when you give it to them, or 17 days, whichever is greater.
Right. So let's say that the buyer wants the records, seller doesn't possess the records, but the seller is the only one permitted to talk to the insurance carrier. So they say, seller, can you get us records on that? If they do that, is that delivery of an additional disclosure?
I would argue yes, that the buyer has cancellation rights with respect to that issue only for 5 days after they get that. Just to be simple.
Okay.
Yes.
I always thought Megan's Law was a contingency. I'm reading it, it's under 11I. And there's no time frame on it. It just says where you can research it. I thought that's an out.
Yeah, Megan's Law is grouped into investigation contingency. So if your buyer goes to the Megan's Law database and finds something that they don't like within their inspection contingency time frame, they can cite that as a reason to back out. If they've already removed their inspection contingency, then go to the database, find something they don't like. They don't have any cancellation rights based on that.
Okay, so on the what do you call this thing? The grid.
The grid.
So on the grid, under investigation of property, which I think is what you're talking about, it says paragraphs 8C and paragraph 12, and Megan's Law is under paragraph 11. So are we sure on that?
Yeah, it is. Buyer is able to look into anything and everything. The inspection contingency is still just as broad as it always was. The buyer doesn't really need any specific reasons. But if they've got the inspection contingency in place, they can cite it there. By the way, don't go to Megan's Law database for your clients. Let them do it. If you try to provide that as an additional service and you don't relay the information exactly, accurately, and it relied on you, you're subjecting yourself to liability. And by the way, there's a lot of false positives on that website. There are also a lot of false negatives. sex offenders have a tendency to move a lot because they get run out of neighborhoods. They are supposed to notify law enforcement of where they live. A lot of times they don't. Now, I'm not sticking up for them. Everyone's looking on face. Thank you. I'm saying they move, they get run out of town a lot, okay? So, they might be living next door, supposed to register, and they're not registered, so. Or it may say they live next door and they moved 2 years ago. Yes,
This is the time I look myself, and if there is one or whatever, I take a picture, send it to them and see, and want to make sure you're okay with that.
yeah, I would not do that. Yeah, I would direct them to the website and let them do all the research.
So where's
So
the
as-
law in here? I'm
Yeah.
looking for
It's later on,
That's what she just showed.
the actual,
That's good. Thank you.
bulk of, the contract.
It's not in the grid,
It's not in the grid necessary.
okay?
No, it's not a unique disclosure. It's just one of the many things buyer could look into. All right, so check out M, section M. Time of possession has changed, at least the default has changed. It used to default to 6 p.m., which created an interesting situation sometimes and got noticed that the property reported at 1 p.m. The contract says the buyer doesn't actually get possession until 6 p.m. It's kind of odd, but the seller could say, hey, congratulations on your sale. I'm still living here for 5 hours and you can't come over. It actually has happened. It's not real common. That happens sometimes. You can still make it 6 p.m., but now the default language is upon notice of recordation. So when title company says you're recorded, the buyer has possessory rights right then. You can go over, you can get the keys, you can enter. Also note in M2 on the far right, additional terms. Keep in mind that the SIP, seller in possession, that's a license to remain in possession. That's for 29 days or less. If the seller is staying for more than 29 days, it's a lease. It's an RLAS, a residential lease after sales. It's different legal distinction altogether. I love that. Okay. Yes, yeah, because I see SIP used for 60 days. I see RLAS used for 15 days, and so they tried to spell it out. All right, let's move on. Next page. I'll pick up the pace just a little bit. Profitable, no labor, finishing, all this. So in section P, they've tried to specify a little bit more items that are included. So if you look at section 9B, if you go forward to page 6, 9B, much like the previous contract, says everything that's included in the sale. All existing fixtures, plus electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating fixtures, ceiling fans, fireplace, gas logs and grates, solar power system, built-in appliances, appliances for which a special opening or encasement has been made, window and door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings, blinds, curtains, drapery, shutters, other materials that cover any portion of the window, attached floor coverings, television antennas, satellite dish, air coolers, conditioners, pool spa equipment, including the cleaning equipment, automatic cleaners, pool covers, garage door openers, remote control. Why am I reading all this? Because it comes up all the time. And if you don't properly advise your seller as to what is included in the sale, you might find yourself buying those items. So make sure on the buy side, you know what's included. On the sell side, you know what's included. If the seller wants to exclude something that would otherwise be legally a fixture, you need to do that in a counter offer. If the buyer wants to include something that would legally be personal property, you need to include that in your offer or in the counter offer process. As a sidebar, doesn't matter what the MLS says. Doesn't matter what any marketing materials say. I get this all the time where an agent says to me, hey, the buyer's just got the keys and the hot tub is gone. Look, there's pictures of the hot tub in the MLS. The MLS description says beautiful, swim spa, 32 jet, whatever, and they even advertise it as part of the property, and they took it. Well, as it turns out, it was personal property, and they can take it. And the buyer's agent saying, but they advertised it. They said it was part of the deal. Well, this section makes it very clear whether it is or is not. And remember from your real estate license exam, the difference between real property and chattel. The reason that was in there is because you need to be able to ascertain whether or not something that started out as personal property became real property, got attached to the property. So they've specified that just because you anchor something to the property for, say, earthquake purposes, doesn't mean it became a fixture. People bolt things to the property, even though they still intend to unbolt them when they leave. And so 9B makes it really clear. And then you can add anything you check in here, you can add. And it's stoves, refrigerators, wine fridge. Only in California, the wine fridge and the electric car charging station. People in other states would laugh at that. So be very meticulous. If the MLS says, for example, the dining room chandelier does not convey. You as the buyer's agent know that the seller does not want that chandelier to go with the property, but it's real property. It's absolutely fixed and it is part of the real property. So in your offer, the buyer doesn't want it. The buyer usually doesn't. Then specifically excluded in P2, right there, the things that would be fixtures, but that you're not included.
Should just be better off if they're selling remove it before you.
If you can, yeah. Otherwise, be really careful about it.
3 battles over. It's 3 rounds.
Yeah, if your seller says, "Hey,
Get it out.
we're keeping that, and we're not going to move it until move," then as a listing agent, you need to be very clear that it's not included. And I would be even more specific. What's it going to be replaced with? Is it just going to be bare wires hanging down? Are they going to put some generic fixture there, or what? So anything you leave to be misinterpreted will be misinterpreted. Yes.
Standard TV bracket. Always see them along.
The TV brackets, now the seller can take them and they need to patch the hole. They don't have to repaint.
But they don't have those things. Right?
They should take it because the seller is not supposed to leave any personal property or debris or trash in that.
So they should take some area.
Yes.
That's what's gonna said.
And in fact, this new contract comes up with remedies now for what happens when the seller leaves stuff they're not supposed to leave. Actually, it's remedies for pain.
Tired to people left it all the time.
Yeah. Yes, brackets, yeah.
I feel like this might be a little more confusing because before it said all refrigerators.
Yeah.
This just said refrigerators.
Yeah,
So if there's multiple, I think, should we be listing that out, do you think?
yeah, you could put it right there in additional items included, also garage refrigerator, or also,
I wish it would say freezers.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there's.
yeah, when in doubt, write it in there.
Barbecue fridge, those things come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
People go, I didn't know that. I just thought I meant the kitchen.
All right, let's move on. So, section Q, notice Q1 to Q5, those are only for reports. So don't put stuff in there that's like pest clearance, or this is just the reports. And the rest of it might be, pest control, section 1 or section 2 might better go in section R down there at the bottom.
Wow.
Or maybe use Q16 or Q17. So in Q4, they added, this came up all the time. The TDS said that the seller would, prior to close, have smoke detectors, seal detectors, proper bracing of the hot water heater. But the appraiser would go out before and it's not there. And the seller said, yeah, I don't have to do that yet, so I'll get to it. Well, now I got to send my appraiser back out for a reinspection because the stupid, carbon monoxide detector. Now the seller has a specific number of days to do it. And the seller, unless you contract, the buyer will do it, has to do it, in a very short amount of time. So that was in seller timeframes.
Where is it when you finish with this?
Previous page, the very last time.
That was in N4. N4 was smoke detector 7 days, right? So, and your question was,
Where you would put terms there?
I think in section R. For what? I think you just need to write in section 1 where it's, that might change. They might want it in Q16, but I think you didn't really give you enough space to specify what you need.
After the report on Q2.
All right, moving on. Let's go to the next page. Yes.
We asked for the pest report in Q2,
Yeah.
right? But
Right here. Q2 is where you indicate who's buying the report. Just the report. Yep. You write pest control report or whatever. All right, let's go on to the next page here in 4A. So one thing they're doing with the library is they are now doing away with all the other purchase agreements, like the probate purchase agreement, the mobile home purchase agreement. They've nixed all that. And instead they've made it an addendum to this purchase agreement. Makes more sense because 99% of that info was redundant and it just had a slight nuance because it was a mobile home, or a slight nuance because it might need court approval of a probate sale. Now it's an addendum that you attach to this RPA. So if you're writing an offer on a probate deal or a mobile home, still use this RPA and then attach the specific addendum that relates to that type of sale.
Is that including multi-unit?
There's not a separate multi-unit purchase agreement, but there's a residential income
Well,
property.
that's what I mean.
Yeah, no, that still exists
Okay.
on its own. Yeah,
Time.
yes.
We can go back to smoke alarms that says that the buyer using air brand. That like during escrow, can they do something there during escrow or because appraisal requires them to
Yeah,
have that.
the paragraph that deals with that later on in the contract, and this is one of the problems with the grid, is you have to go to that paragraph later and read it. But it's basically the case that they can pay the service provider directly or escrow can invoice, but buyer would have access to add those things in during that time before their appraiser gets there. So that's all dealt with, based on negotiations.
So what's our official position on the government required point of sale inspection reports? I try on the buy side, we try and get it in, but when it's often counted on.
Yeah, I hate to knock on wood, but there usually aren't any.
Right.
And so it's usually moved, but yeah, it could come up. Your seller could be on the hook. If there's a point of sale requirement in a particular jurisdiction you didn't know about, they agreed in advance, then yeah, they're gonna have to cover it. So you could counter it out, be safe. As a buyer's agent, I always put it in. And it's rarely ever countered out anyway. It just stays in there and doesn't become an issue. In 4C, those are all the advisories that could be attached. They pre-check some just for information purposes. Don't necessarily, SBSA is on there. You don't have to check the box for SBSA. Your buyer is going to get an SBSA. The seller has an SBSA. There's going to be one in the deal. It doesn't need to be attached to, or need to be in a necessary incorporated into the RPA. Does that make sense? It can stand alone. So you don't need to check that box. If you check that box, the lender is going to want that 14-page document attached to this every time they see it. It's going to make it 30 pages even. And it's just generally not necessary. All right. So going on to paragraph 5. So the initial deposit, this is reverting back to the grid. It explains the initial deposit that we saw in D1. And it says So the default position is still wire like it was before. And I used to add in there check or wire to give the buyer the opportunity to bring in a personal check if they want to. You can still do that, but now there's additional language that if the escrow officer says, I don't take personal checks, you must wire, then the buyer must wire, even though they stated that they would bring in a personal check. It is not an essential term, which the buyer could say, well, since you won't take my personal check, we don't have a deal. Yeah, we have a deal, and you got to wire in your money. So people are worried about wires for obvious reasons, and as agents, we scare the hell out of people about accidentally wiring your money to Nigeria because it happens. It really happens. But if escrow wants a wire, they can insist on a wire, even if your buyer said they wanted to bring in a check. So keep that in mind.
Right, just to remind you, it's like, I actually had escrow hacked last week and he resent the money a second time.
Really?
And somehow his bank caught it. Yeah, it was insane, 200,000.
Wow.
I wasn't even on the email. What? So I thought I heard something. Yeah, he called to check after he wired it again, but that's even now. And I was not on that, even though all of us, he told me time and time and time. Luckily, he got his money back.
So the 200,000 went to a bogus.
Well, no, they hadn't wired it yet. There was a safety check I think in his bank. He had wired the money, but then he went in and it was crazy. I found out about it after the fact, but it happened that fast.
Okay, here we go. So section 5, this talks about deposit, increased deposit. Remember, if you do an increased deposit, you've got to do a new liquidated damages clause regarding that. Also, it talks about retention of deposit. So this used to be in another section. Now they've grouped it more logically right here on deposits. What's a scenario where you could lose the deposit? It's sort of right there. And there's some language in here in 5A3 under retention of deposit that sort of reminds parties that if they want a contract for some non-refundable deposit or something, to talk with an attorney. What they're saying in code here is you probably don't have a non-refundable deposit. There really kind of is no such thing as a non-refundable deposit, because you can always make a legal argument that your deposit shouldn't be forfeited if the seller did something they weren't supposed to do. So as an agent, please just don't even write in counteroffer language, deposit to be non-refundable. The deposit is the deposit. If someone has a right to it, they'll have a right to it. If they don't, they don't. To say it's non-refundable and then your client find out that the law says that party can get that deposit back and you're the one who created the non-refundable language, they're going to say, hey, I relied on you to get me that deposit. So don't practice any law on your counteroffers. Helpful hint. So there's a new section here in 5C3, buyer's loan status. So this is based on, this comes up all the time. The seller's agent wants to talk to the buyer's lender. Lenders should not talk to sellers' agents or sellers about the buyer's loan with any specifics. But here it indicates that they can get status updates. So by contract, the buyer's agent has to give the seller's agent, buyer has to give the seller the buyer's lender's contact information. And if it changes, they got to give them the new contact information. And the seller, or what's usually the seller's agent, can call and say, hey, Bob, hey, Chris, this is Ty, the listing agent on the Main Street property. How's the buyer's loan going? Now, what they should not tell me is, well, with that bankruptcy 3 years ago, we're really working hard on trying to get, whoa, that's way TMI. But they can say, we're in underwriting. They can say, we are conditionally approved, waiting on one condition. They can say what status we're in. We have ordered loan docs. Loan docs should arrive at escrow sometime this afternoon. That's a status update. But to say, well, because of the divorce situation, the buyer's, funds are kind of tied up in a joint account from prior, well, that is way off.
She's a citizen.
And it's hard to get. All right, so
Is that?
that is new. That's all brand new.
Well,
That's
that's new, but I mean.
It's not, you have to personally request this from the.
Right, it's
Cooperative.
baked in. That's
So what I'm saying is that, has that always been that you're not supposed to share that?
I usually give just status updates. So
Well, I'm talking, forget the status update. I'm talking like, I got 6 offers in, I'm calling all the lenders to figure out the buyer. That lender now says to tell me they have a bankruptcy or they have money tied up somewhere else. I'm trying to verify the validity of their offer.
yeah,
but isn't that language prior to the contract being consummated?
right.
Right? So doing checking with the lender to see what type of borrower there is, that's all before everything's signed. So we can go and reach out to the.
So what, I don't understand the logic. So you're telling me, so if I'm understanding, so maybe I'm calling you and you're going, yep, everything looks great. And then you run your credit update, you go, holy shit, this isn't great at all anymore because of the X, Y, and Z. I'm not supposed to get that information and my seller's packing to move out? The status update, you can give me some BS, like it's in underwriting, it's in underwriting. That's like a Bank of America quote right there, right? It is, right? It'll sit in underwriting for, June, July. Seriously, I don't understand. Why would that suddenly become a secret when they're supposed to be, everyone's supposed to be cooperating to complete a transaction?
I think what they've tried to do here is make it clear that the seller can find out about the buyer's loan status with a phone call. Previously, I could argue if you're the listing agent and you call my buyer's lender, and I've advised my buyer's lender when that maniac Ed calls, he is not on our side of the transaction, may not give him information about our loan. The lender would have to respect that. That is confidential information.
I think that being added in there, what's scaring me is your second sentence that said, but don't be talking about a bankruptcy, a divorce, or this or that. And I'm like, whoa, that's exactly what you should be talking about.
Well, a status could be loans in suspension.
Yeah.
Correct.
I would
be livid if a deal fell apart because of bankruptcy and the lender knew about the bankruptcy 3 weeks ago. I mean, I would be livid.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would think to myself, I mean, everybody should have some recourse. And to me, that would be, I would consider that the loan officer lying to me. If they're telling me, yeah, we got this and that, and they have, I mean, that's huge knowledge. So were you just using like a bad example, or are you saying that's really the way it's supposed to be?
No one's interpreted this yet.
So can you just, lender, are there derogatories
Like the lender.
in the client's file that affect the process and well?
Sure. They
So it's either yes or no, and if you tell something like what you described, it's telling you a lie.
They don't tell you anything.
But if there's a bankruptcy, obviously he was never pre-approved.
Yes, file.
I don't think so, but I can still argue that to give you that, just to make sure that they're making the lender reaching.
That's still in regards to that.
What's bankruptcy popping up while you're in the transaction? That's part of the pre-approval. You're gonna, what, pardon me? Part of the pre-approval? And now if they're qualifying with a bankruptcy, right, they're past whatever the 3-4 year, 2-3-4 year mark, then yeah. If needed to be brought up, but typically, our job is as a lender is to make sure we review everything and then put it in the best light possible.
Yeah.
To get the offer accepted.
Let's move on. I don't mean to cut you off, but we're not going to make it to the end here anyway. So let's go on to 5E. Keep in mind that limits on credits to a buyer that could be limited by the lender. So if you got a $10,000 credit and then you got another $5,000 repair credit, the lender can only give $10,000. This section says the buyer kind of forfeits that additional money.
Okay.
It could be limited by, and the seller's not obligated to give it to them outside escrow or a brown paper bag or anything. If you have to go through the deal, it might not happen.
It's also applicable to Negotiated credit, not one that arises out of.
Even a new one, yeah, it could be limited by what the lender will allow. So if you get to the repair request stage and you ask for another $6,000, the seller says, okay. And then the lender says, I cannot, the seller cannot give this borrower another 6,000. They can only give them 4. That $2,000 is gone. They're gonna be limited. to
Reduce
what-
the price or I'll back out.
Say again.
Reduce the price or I'll back out for condition for investigation.
Well, the
of
next, the
the
very next sentence says, unless you have a written agreement to reduce the price, they can't be done.
All right, so let's go on. Next page, section 7 talks about closing and possession. We talked about earlier. 7B. Here's your as is language. It's already in there. Kind of a pet peeve of mine, but I know why you want to write as is on your counter offer. I get it. You're trying to preemptively let the buyer know that you're not going to rewrite this deal after your inspection. And so I know why you do it. It still might have some value, but it's redundant. It's already in there. This offer is as is already. You don't need to write it in as a buyer's agent somewhere else on the contract. You don't need to make it a seller counter offer as is. It's already in there. So just keep that in mind.
In the,
I would also urge you that to preemptively say seller's not going to do any repairs or credits, that could cause an unnecessary cancellation. So you think you're doing your seller a great service as a listing agent by saying, hey, you know what, we already got them ahead of time committed to as is. We will not do any repairs for them. Then they get their inspection. There's this $300 repair that they just, for some reason, people just get things in their head. There's this $300 thing they want done, but the seller already told us they won't do it. And we already agreed that we won't ask, so we'll cancel. That is their only option. And you, the listing agent, would be saying, why didn't you just ask us for the $300? I pulled it out of my own wallet. You just canceled the deal.
You should have put 2.5% commission instead of 1%.
You backed them into a corner when you gave them that as is language, or when you told them the seller will do no repairs before you even know what they're going to ask for. Painted them into that corner, and that is what it is.
I had been striking paragraph 11B II because it is the section where it grants the buyer the option to request remedy for repairs. So that's how I was accomplishing seller sales as is, right?
Yeah.
Where did they get rid of that completely?
Some of that language is in there, but it's not the same. I don't know exactly the answer to the question, but the way repairs credits are dealt with is the exact same as it always has been, and everyone's rights are the same. Okay, moving on. Section 7E. Close of escrow. This came up actually in one of our transactions this year. The seller had a rent back, but when the buyer closed, the buyer wanted all the keys, garage door openers, codes, access. And our agent representing the seller said, no, you'll get those at the end of the rent back. The seller's still here. And the buyer said, I want all the keys. I insist, I'm going to sue you if you don't give me the keys to my property. And they came to me and they're like, well, what should we do? And I said, well, I'm wondering why they want the keys so bad. I would almost give them a fake key, because why do you want the key? You don't even have possessory rights. Why would you have the keys? Well, now they get the keys. It turns out, they get the keys, and the justification is, and it's far-fetched, suppose the seller's in a rent bag, goes out of town, property's flooding or is on fire, then they contact the owner, and the owner can't go and get into their property. It's far-fetched, but you as an owner, just like if you had a rental property, you'd have a key, the tenant would have a key.
This one and then the like around the property.
And if you're like me, as a tenant, I always change the locks anyway and just didn't tell the owner because I wanted to have the only key to that property. You know, I figured it's.
Can you say it again one more time on the Zoom, so we have it in the recording?
What's that? All right, moving on, 8.
This is weird. I hope that's not a problem. If you read that whole paragraph, it's not just keys. You're supposed to give up passwords to your internet devices. I'm like,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
what, you're gonna come in and watch my.
Yeah. I've watched your net.
Remotely.
You could put it in a counter offer, during seller rent back period. Seller will retain all keys, password, copy that same language, just count it out.
Wasn't that already?
You can also put it in other terms, right?
Sure. Yeah,
Put it in the SIP.
I thought it was already the SIP that kind
Yeah.
of keys over.
the change in the SIP.
Oh, so the
Yeah.
difference is.
Now we got a buyer posting on our Facebook.
Yeah, okay, so take a look at 8.5. This comes up all the time. No loan contingency means there's no loan contingency. People will waive the loan contingency, but if they don't get their loan, they cannot buy the property. And then they find some other way to cancel. That is an inappropriate use of contingency that you didn't have. So if your buyer needs a loan to get the property, you need a loan contingency. Otherwise, the buyer is saying, if I don't get my loan, I'm giving the seller the deposit in exchange for their truck. Same thing with appraisal. People will waive the appraisal contingency. They still have the right to an appraisal, by the way. If someone waives an appraisal contingency and you get the deal going, and then they say, Tuesday, the appraisal will be there. And you, the listing agent, say, whoa, what's this deal with the appraisal? You have no appraisal contingency. They can, as part of their investigation, have it appraised. They don't have any cancellation rights based on anything we find out in that appraisal in terms of value. But they can have it appraised. If they want to cite their loan contingency that they did have because it didn't appraise that value, that is an inappropriate use of the loan contingency when it really is using an appraisal contingency they didn't have, and vice versa. If you get a property that you can't get a loan, because you can't get the appraisal, then we can't cite one when you really need the other, and they're not interchangeable. They're two totally separate contingencies. In 8H on page 6, take a look at 8H. Buyer shall have no obligation to remove a contractual contingency unless seller has provided all required documents, reports, disclosures, and information pertaining to that contingency. This is a major change. I've said many times that if contingency period comes due, but the seller still hasn't given us some important thing, I say your contingency is not predicated upon now, when you get that thing, that report that they owe you, it could revive some contingencies because you've got a chance to review it. But the seller doesn't get to say, we're not removing our contingencies on day 17,
But
even though it's day 17, buyer, because you have not given us, we haven't even seen the HOA docs yet.
I was just saying that, I see that all the time.
How are we going to remove our contingency of HOA report review when we haven't even seen that yet? So now it's saying if the seller has not given you the HOA docs yet, the buyer does not have to remove the HOA contingency. That is exactly opposite of the way we've interpreted the contract before. I would have had to tell you as buyer's agent, hey, you know what? They could kick you out if you don't remove it. They give you a notice. Try to tie the two together, but legally the two are not tied together. You don't get to wait on their thing for your performance. Now you can. So that's
That's the way I should have been.
it should have been that way all the time. Absolutely.
Hey, Ty,
Yes.
has the contingency removal form been revised to where, okay,
Oh, yes.
okay.
It has. It has. I think they've wiped out a whole section of it where other contractual duties, and they put it all into that one column. And as every single contingency is on there, and so you can pick and choose. They've revamped it.
Okay. Thank you.
In 8J, sale of the buyer's property, not contingent upon that. Please don't have a secret contingency. This comes up all the time, especially in, a seller's market. You don't mention anything about the contingency on the sale of their property. They don't really notice that you didn't have enough money or whatever. And when your property doesn't get sold, you bail out of the one you're buying. That was a contingency you don't have. If you need to sell a property to buy this property, create the contingency with the COP. All right. We talked about MLS. So it doesn't matter what the MLS says, the contract prevails. Let's move on to page 7. Items excluded from the sale. So that talks about what is automatically excluded. Audio and video equipment, flat screen, TV speakers, and talks about brackets will be removed and the holes repaired but not painted. So that's a reverse default position from the old RPA. Down in 11A4 at the bottom of this page. In the event seller or seller's agent prior to close of escrow becomes aware of adverse conditions materially affecting the property, any material inaccuracy or disclosures, information or representations previously provided to buyer. Under this paragraph, seller shall in writing promptly provide a subsequent or amended TDS, SPQ, other document covering those items. Any such document shall be deemed an amendment to the TDS or SPQ. This does not include like something the buyer already found out. The buyer gets an inspection, gives the inspection to the seller. The seller doesn't have to amend their TDS based on all that stuff. This is if the seller discovers or remembers something new. They need to amend the TDS. The buyer will have the opportunity to review that new information.
Crack slabs, just not.
Yeah, crack slab, for example. Yeah, real stuff. Let's go on to the next page, page 8. In D, defensible space disclosure, we dealt with this a lot about, and it outlines very clearly in D what the requirements are. If the TDS is required and it's in a high or very high zone, seller shall deliver the FHDS. And then in G, it talks about, in G2, talks about what if the buyer doesn't agree with the situation on FHDS, they can cancel. In E, cannot waive any statutory requirements. So if it's required by law, lead-based paint disclosure, or now the FHDS, can't waive it.
Actually, a couple of listings are both in the same area, but it showed them be in the high fire severity zone on the NHD. But if you go to CAL FIRE, it's not showing as being in there. So
I've heard of that discrepancy a few times, and I think CAL FIRE is the authority. So I would disclose to the buyer that we've got conflicting information and let them know. All right, so let's move on. Next page 13. Keep in mind, at 13A, notice the sentence, the preliminary title report is only an offer by the title insurer to issue a policy of title insurance and may not contain every item affecting title. That's kind of a scary disclaimer, but your buyer should know that. The prelim, there may be a problem with the title that is not on the prelim. So the investigation may not end right there with the prelim. That's just an offer of title insurance.
I've never seen that before. Was there a problem out there?
I've seen it very rarely. And if they find that title insurance policy, then I think you've got a title insurance claim after the fact, and I think they'll try to tell you about it. All right, let's move on. Page 10. 14B2. Keep in mind that seller has no obligation to agree or respond to buyer's requests. This is nothing new. This is in the old RPA also, but The seller does not have to respond to a request for repair. Don't even have to respond to it, let alone agree to it.
Wow.
This includes lender required repairs. You get a VA borrower and the VA appraiser goes out and says, hey, the value's fine, but there's no window or there's some bare wires, whatever. We need this issue corrected in order to make a loan. Just because the seller accepted a VA offer does not mean they've given carte blanche to any repair that the VA appraiser comes up with. The seller still doesn't have to do them. The buyer can specify it on the new RR as being a lender required repair. The seller can still say, too bad. Release of funds, release of deposit requires mutually signed instructions. Please do not utter the famous last words. If this happens, you'll get your deposit back. Or, hey seller, if the buyer does this, you can take the deposit. If you make definitive statements like that, you will absolutely at some point be flat wrong and just indicate, hey, look, the buyer would not have a contractual right to do what they're doing in this situation. But to get their deposit requires that a mutually signed agreement or an arbitration award or a court order. It's not automatic. So make sure you kind of put in that disclaimer when you're talking about who might get a deposit. Verification of property condition, keep in mind in 16, that's not a contingency. It never was. Nothing's new there. It's just to confirm that the property is in substantially the same condition as when they made their offer. At 21, buyer acknowledges that the MLS pictures and information about the home might live on the internet for years after they buy. We've had buyers call us and say, hey, I just bought this listing of yours and I want the MLS photos taken down. They're still on Zillow. Everyone's looking at my house. We can't control that information. Once it's out there, we can't retract it, and we're putting them on notice in advance that information and data and pictures of their home that could stay out there on the internet forever. And
So if someone does give us that request, and we can still control our own MLS ones, we don't have to, do we have to? Why?
you don't have to, but you could. I mean, I don't see why it makes any difference. If you could pull down your photo.
Well, it does make a difference, because like when we're trying to figure out a value of a property, and there's, a picture of the front of the house and nothing else, and they say it's got upgrades, you have no clue if they were 20 years,
Yeah.
So it does make a difference, and it hurts the appraisers. I mean, it's ridiculous, but I didn't know so we don't have an obligation. But
No, you don't. But people have made that request, and, we've tried to, unwind that side.
But really, it doesn't help the other parties out there.
Right. 27, time is of the essence. So that's a legal term, time is of the essence. It means that missing a deadline, even by a tiny little bit, is a full-on breach. So I encourage you all to be cooperative and collaborative, and, if buyer needs an extra day for the inspection, give it to them. If the closing isn't happening this morning and it's supposed to, and they say, you know what, sorry, we're going to fund tonight and record tomorrow, just, be a little more easygoing about it. Technically speaking, time is of the essence. If someone doesn't close on time, they have completely breached the contract. It's in there because in some contracts, time is not of the essence. And then they go to a reasonable amount of time standard. This says, hey, these deadlines are real. People are planning their life around this stuff, and time is of the essence. So it reads, neither this agreement nor any provision may be extended, amended, modified, altered, or changed, except in writing, signed by buyer and seller. That's because of two different legal concepts. One, the statute of frauds. Statute of frauds says that everything, real estate agreements, must be in writing, signed by the parties to be bound. There's also another legal concept called parole evidence rule. Parole evidence rule states that if we have a written contract and we go to court, you can't bring in evidence about an oral agreement that contradicts our written agreement. Because to do that, it'd be like Judge Judy, and everyone would just be saying, well, he said and she said. It has to be in writing, and we're not going to use, parole evidence. If there's a modification to your terms, just put it in writing. Even though we've kind of agreed over the phone, just follow it up with an addendum. All right, next page, 29. Look, so this is the legal page. I won't spend as much time on this as you'd think, because we can't really explain it to our clients anyway, which I've always found to be a strange disconnect. But I want you to understand in as brief layperson terms as possible what this means. Liquidated damages, this is only based on buyer's default. Liquidated damages has nothing to do with the seller breach. It is just a buyer breach. If the buyer fails to perform, the pre-agreed upon damages will be the actual deposit paid. So in contract law, damages can be all kinds of things, consequential damages, damages in reliance. There could be lots of measures of damages. In this contract, we've agreed in advance what the damages will be. It'll be the actual deposit paid. If the actual deposit is more than 3%, the buyer plans on occupying the home, the law limits that to down to 3%. So it'll be the actual deposit page or 3% if the buyer's going to occupy it. And if you did an increased deposit, you needed to assign a new liquidated damages clause, which brings that up to the new amount. So liquidated damages are for the seller and they're pre-agreed upon amount of damage. If the seller suffers 10 times that amount of damage, it doesn't matter. All they get is the deposit. If the seller suffers no monetary damage, this happens all the time. Buyer breached, backed out at the last minute, had no contingencies. The seller was able to sell the property again right away for more money, didn't lose a dime. The buyer, the previous buyer, owes the seller the whole deposit. And they can't go into court and say, they didn't lose any money on my breach. We agreed what the damages would be in advance. That's the whole concept. So liquidated damages are pre-agreed. Mediation. The mediation clause, there's no place to initial that by itself like there used to be. Mediation is part of this agreement, no matter what. Parties agreed to mediate. They gave you a website in there where people could go to set up a mediation if they want to mediate, or you could choose another mediator if both people agree. The mediation fees will be split 50-50, and they're agreeing in advance whether they've agreed to arbitrate or not. They've agreed to mediate first, no matter what. And they have to do that before they file some court action, otherwise they will forfeit their attorney's fees. The arbitration section in 31, far more complicated. The only thing I want to point out is, one, arbitration is very expensive. I used to tell buyers, this is a way to avoid going to real court. This is a less expensive way of dealing with these things. You know, arbitration can be $10,000 a day. A day. If you've got a $10,000 deposit you're fighting over, you don't want to go to arbitration. Trust me. You just lost before you even showed up. So, you can tell buyers, sellers that arbitration is expensive, but don't really explain to them what this means. They can opt in or opt out. If the buyer initials 31 and then the seller doesn't, we need a counter offer. You don't have a deal yet with respect to arbitration. Neither one initials it or both. Make sure that your contract has neither one or both in 31, and let the parties decide. And if they ask you to explain to them whether or not they should arbitrate, just don't. Tell them, read that and make their own decision. All right, and getting to page 15. Notice in 32, expiration of offer, seller has no obligation to respond to an offer made. I get this call a lot, especially for our busy listing agents. Hey, we made an offer on your property last Tuesday and the seller hasn't even responded to us. It's like, well, they don't have to. It's good practice, professional courtesy to respond. The seller doesn't have an obligation to do it. I think the best practice is to have the seller initial down here at the bottom of this page, offer not accepted, put the date. Just send it to them and have them reject it in writing. Give that to the buyer's agent with your apologies, and then there's nothing to argue about.
So if we suspect that the listing agent did not present the offer, nothing we can do about it. You know, let's say, get me the cancellation, prove that you submitted it to the seller. And
I would still ask for all that stuff. You may not get it, but you know, I would definitely ask for it. So, let's see, that's it for that page. Also, presentation of offer, same kind of concept. When you send all the offers to the seller, have them initial that presentation of offer, and then even if the seller doesn't respond to it, you can say, look, my seller signed it, they saw it, they put their signature on it right here the day I sent it to them.
So down there, they want the broker.
That's you. That's agent.
I know, but I mean, presentation of offer, so the seller's not saying, yeah, I saw it, it's the broker saying, yeah.
My version says agent or seller initials.
Well, maybe yours, mine's not broker, just.
Where are we?
The bottom of 16, the very end.
Yours says what, agent or seller?
Agent or seller initials.
Oh, myself.
You have the newest version?
Yeah, they did it. Yes.
Yeah, it's mine.
The seller, need to sign people.
They should. I mean, it's not required, but that's the best practice. Okay, so questions. Do we have any questions from online? Any questions from Zoom?
Oh, they fell asleep a long time ago.
Sure. They've been in their pajamas. They don't.
But at least when you have peer pressure here, start.
Yeah. All right, so I hope that that was useful to you guys. It'll come out mid-December. We'll do another class in January on all the new forms. I'll show you how they changed. But when this comes out, you got to use this one. And please read it. Read it word for word and line by line.
Hey, Ty.
It'll be very.
There are some Zoom questions.
Yes. Okay.
If VA wants repair before loan, how do seller and buyer handle?
I'm sorry. Repeat.
If VA wants repair before loan, how do seller and buyer handle?
VA wants to repair.
If VA wants to repair, okay, so then the buyer would request a repair and specify on the RR that it is a lender required repair. And if the seller says no, then the buyer issues a cancellation and the buyer should be entitled to the deposit back. They still have a contingency in place.
Okay.
Or the buyer can do it. So the seller can get it.
If they allow it.
Go put it in your room on.
Yeah.
So Ty, real quick,
Yes.
there is no counter, the seller signing that contingency offer, they agree to go forward. If it is signed at 11:59 PM,
Yep.
escrow opens that day.
Escrow may not necessarily open, but we'll have a binding contract on that day. So the days, that would be day 0. Right. 1 minute later would be day to.
So looking to see what day it's opening, you really still got to refer back to the agents.
Yeah, opening escrow could be different than the contractual contract date. In that scenario, they definitely would be different because escrow not even open. But yeah, the date that the second party signed and delivered it back to the other party is the date. If the second party signed 11:59, the agent emailed it to them the next morning, then that's the issue. Anything else from online?
Hold on really quick.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
As a buyer's agent, would you typically recommend under E1 filling in like an adjustable rate not to exceed interest rate percentage?
Yeah, we've always tried to cap that at some rate that would still be reasonable.
Okay.
But you can discuss with your buyer. I mean, most buyers right now, if they're getting 2.75 on $1 million loan and the rate changes to 4, the amount of interest they're paying on that payment has probably gone up so much that it's a deal breaker.
Okay.
So if you had capped it at say 3, 3 1/4, 3 1/8, then that gives them the ability to cite the loan contingency. Even though they can get a loan, you're getting a loan at some terrible rates and they can cite the loan contingency. So to frame it with some rates gives you buyer that exit strategy.
Do you ever see that countered, or as a sales agent, you would counter?
Yeah, I've seen it countered if the buyer puts in something that's too low.
Okay.
Yeah.
If the going rate today is 2.75 and you say 2.85 is our max, they're going to say, hey, rates can easily adjust to 2.9 before you lock, and we don't want to give you that out.
Okay.
2.9 should still be acceptable to you, and we want to counter it.
You put the
Okay.
fading rates and terms.
Yeah, that's up to interpretation as what's prevailing. Maybe like for one lender versus another, one loan type versus another, I'd put a number on it.
Okay.
And actually, at this point, your buyer should have that pre-approval. And you should have some conversation with your lender that before you write the offer, that there's some type of agreement of what you think will fly.
But they're not locked in. They generally, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't lock in a rate until you have a contract for a sale.
But you're saying put some rate in it.
I put some rate in there to give the buyer an exit clause, so I'm had, yeah.
Hey, where do I need to be at for the acceptable?
I haven't filled out any.
Was there another one?
Yeah, they're looking for clarification, asking if arbitration needs to be signed.
Arbitration does not have to be signed. The parties can opt out of it, but if one party signs, the other party has to either sign or counter that out. So
Okay.
either neither party signs arbitration or both. But we can't look at a contract, let's see a mismatch, because the court won't know if they have jurisdiction or not.
Okay.
But do know, correct me if I'm wrong, probably 99% of contracts, I've done 1,000 deals, I've probably not had arbitration in 2. They were attorneys and they didn't want arbitration. So that's not legal justification. I'm not an attorney. I'm just saying you have to understand if you're going to submit, because your client went, I don't know about that, just leave it out. If there's multiple offers, the other agent, probably the other 7 offers all have it in. And a lot of people, it's the herd mentality. They're just saying whether they understand it or not. So be careful on changing things that aren't necessarily the Southern California norm.
Right.
And you may be harming your position for something that's a nothing. I've never been arbitrary. I mean, it's a nothing burger.
Right, until it is.
I mean, it's one of those, I don't know how many our offices have been involved with. I'm sure the offices had some, but
Yeah,
be careful. Be careful of trying to get so protective. That's what happens when you put 4% on the interest rate. I'm willing to do it. I haven't done it 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Because I'm
I
like,
don't do it.
you know what I do? I say, you got a deal, go lock your loan.
Yeah.
Right, go lock your loan. Don't do this, all my clients shit. Don't want to do, no, you take charge and get the loan locked.
Right.
And
also-
counter, as a listing agent, did you counter that provision?
If they had something in there? Yeah, but I'd probably kick them to the curb unless they were definitely my best buyer. Then I'd go back and go, I'd call the agent. I'd call and say, if they just said, well, I don't know, I'm just trying to protect them. That's different than someone going, oh yeah, they're freaked out if it goes above 3.25. Then I might look at them differently too, right?
Yeah, and you can't really explain the arbitration clause to your client, but it does clearly say in there that if something falls in the jurisdiction of, say, small claims court, it's $10,000 and less, or the probate court, if it's a probate sale, you can't agree to arbitrate. The probate court has jurisdiction exclusively over that property. So you cannot.
So do you think it's wrong? Like I usually just tell people, if you can decide, but I'm telling you, 95 to 99% are going to have this. I'm just stating the fact. Is that? I mean, I'm probably influencing them.
Yeah,
but I'm not giving advice.
Yeah, and a motion to compel arbitration is quite rare. If parties did agree to arbitrate, if one initiated arbitration, the other said, I'm not gonna show up, and they give a motion to compel. That can be done, but it's.
And then they also need clarification on entity buyers for a trust. Need to put trustees' legal names and use the extra form 2. Basically, how do these people sign?
Yeah, so they'll sign,
Question.
The question was, how would a trustee sign on behalf of the trust, buying or selling a property? And the answer is, based on the way the trust says they should sign. Typically, John Doe as trustee for the John Doe Living Trust, Jane Doe as trustee.
Okay.
Once you have the RCSDS, which proves that they are trustees of that trust, then they can just sign their name. Well, properly, they should sign their name as trustee, so we know it's not them as an individual, them acting on behalf of a trust, just sort of a legal designation. But the RCSD means they don't have to write out all that stuff in every place. They are the authorized signer of that legal entity. Okay. Is that all?